Right now, welcome to the second of 4 sustainability webinars we will hold in the spring of 2019. My name is Karin Verschuren. I'm a doctoral student here at Teachers College and I will be your host today. Pilot series was initiated by the Teachers College Initiative for Sustainable Futures. This series is sponsored by the Office of Digital Learning with the goal to leverage technology to connect research experts and teachers. So last time we talked about the history of environmental and sustainability education. We underlined the 3 pillars of sustainability, the environmental, social, and economic pillars. And we showed different visualizations and we explored how this is shaped at the level of the Department of Education here in New York City and looked at initiatives in schools. And today we hone in on climate change, which is a complicated and even frightening topic. In March, we saw thousands of students walk out of their schools to voice their concerns about the future. And one of their requests is mandated climate change education. So I'm excited to introduce our 3 speakers for today. We have Professor Jason Smerdon from the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. He will present what scientists know about climate change, the modeling and predictions, and the local implications. Sarah Pigeon is joining us from Solar One. She will discuss how to bring issues of climate change and sustainability into schools and communities. And Mark Rolla from PS90 Coney Island will expand on initiatives on the ground in one school in New York City and will highlight the difference educators can make. So we're using Zoom as our platform, and for those of you who've not used it before, I'll take a minute to explain the functionality. First, I've muted all the participants. You won't hear any background noise. You have 3 functions at the bottom. One is the chat function. We'll be monitoring that all along. And we have Cassidy with us here as our TC tech support. So if there's any issue, she will deal with that. If you have questions for the speakers that you'd like to send during the presentations, use the Q&A option at the right. It allows for all the panelists to see the questions, and we'll try to tackle as many as possible during the last 10 or 15 minutes of this webinar. And so please only use a Q&A for questions, as the panelists cannot keep track of the comments in the chat function. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Jason Smerdon. He's a Lamont Research Professor at the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory and a co-director of the Earth Institute's undergraduate program in sustainable development, and both are at Columbia University. He teaches classes in climate science and sustainable development. And the broad objective of his research is to characterize and understand climate variability and change on multi-decadal to centennial timescales. He's particularly interested in climate variability spanning the last 2,000 years and how climate models represent climatic change over this time period, and how studies of climate over the last 2,000 years can be used to inform future climate projections. His recent work has focused on hydroclimatic variability and change, with an emphasis on multi-decadal droughts in North America. In addition to over 90 published papers in the scientific literature, Smerdon is a co-author of the textbook Climate Change, The Science of Global Warming and Our Energy Future. He received a BA in physics from Gustavus Adolphus College and a PhD in applied physics from the University of Michigan. So welcome, Jason. I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Corinne. I always find it a little strange to be literally talking to a wall. But the advantage is that I can always imagine you laughing at my jokes. So there does have its upsides. I'm going to jump in fairly quickly because I have a lot to cover and I want to make sure that we get through it all. And I'm going to start with an uncontroversial scientific statement. The Earth is warming and we are causing it. This may sound like a statement that's maybe too firm, given perhaps your understanding of the public discussion around this debate, but scientifically, this is not a controversial statement at all. In fact, this is one of my favorite studies. It's literally titled Consensus on Consensus, a synthesis of consensus estimates on human-caused global warming. And these authors looked at multiple different assessments of the consensus on scientists' view of whether or not the Earth is warming and what was causing it. And you can look at these various studies as they were summarized, but basically the finding is that well over 90%, an average of 97% of scientists agree that with this statement. And so it really scientifically is not controversial. In fact, as scientists are closer and closer to the subject of climate change, these numbers go closer to 100%. So the consensus on this point doesn't come out of nowhere. It's built on some very solid scientific evidence. And I want to walk through 3 supporting facts that support this overall statement that the Earth is warming and we're causing it. So the first fact that I want to review is that CO2 in the atmosphere is increasing. We actually have records of CO2 in the atmosphere going back to 1959. Is my pointer working? Here we go. Okay. So this is a record that's actually been collected continuously from Mauna Loa, Hawaii. You can see the observatory in the inset there. This record began in 1959, and at the time, the value of CO2 in the atmosphere was 316 parts per million. That's 0.0316%. And you can see a basic feature of this record is a rapidly increasing CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. When I was born in the 1970s, it was around 350. Since my children have been born over the last several years, it's been over 400 parts per million. Last year, the average was 409 parts per million, and the most recent monthly estimate was 412 parts per million. If that doesn't sound like much, let me give you an analogy. If someone my size drinks 2 beers, my blood alcohol content is actually 0.04%. It's right at the point where someone begins to feel the effects of alcohol. It's also where I get more interesting. But the point is that it's an example of a much larger system feeling the effects of trace changes. And of course, the Earth system and the human body are very different systems, but keep that in mind from the perspective of how very small trace amounts of things can affect things on a much larger level. And I should say the increase since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution is over 40% at this point. We know that this is a level that's unprecedented over the last 800,000 years. So this is where we are present day. And these are the Ice Age cycles going back 800,000 years ago. And over that time period, CO2 has not gotten anywhere over 300 parts per million over that time period. In fact, we have to go back about 3.5 million years to the mid-Pliocene to a point at which CO2 levels reached 400 parts per million, a time during which the world was a very different place. So you don't have to believe me. You can look at lots of different scientific statements on this subject. Perhaps you've heard of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but this is an organization that assesses the state of the science every 5 to 7 years. It represents the work of thousands of scientists and many different governmental agencies, NGOs, et cetera. And their statement on the CO2 levels in our atmosphere is thus: atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases have increased to unprecedented levels in at least the last 800,000 years. That's from the ice core estimate that I just showed you in the previous slide. CO2 concentrations have increased by 40% since pre-industrial times, primarily from fossil fuel emissions. So not only is the CO2 increasing, but it's as a consequence of human activities. Okay, so CO2 is increasing in the atmosphere to unprecedented levels. The second fact is that the Earth is warming. We have lots of evidence for this, but this is just one example of data that show the warming at the surface of our planet. This is a global average temperature compiled from meteorological observations around the world. You can see that this record begins back around 1880 and increases up through present day. Here is the 2018 global mean estimate. Over that time period, there's been about 1 degree C of warming. And if you look at these last several years, most of them have ranked in the top 10. In fact, the top 18 warmest years have all been since the turn of the 21st century. The top 20 only includes this 1998 year that was a large El Nino year. But this idea of 1 degree C of warming might not sound like a lot when you think about how things change seasonally or from day to day in New York City or wherever else you live. But just to put this in context, we're talking about global average temperatures, and that degree C of warmth relative to the ups and downs in this record is actually a significant amount. If the equivalent change occurred to human height in the United States, it would be equivalent to roughly 1 foot of height change in both men and women. And I guarantee you that we would all notice that style of a change. So to put it in context, it's a significant change already that's been observed across the planet. If you don't like meteorological observations, though, you can look to lots of different things within the Earth system that are all consistent with the idea that the Earth is warming. So we don't need those surface temperature measurements. We see snow cover going down, ice melting, sea level going up, which is consistent of a warming ocean. The oceans are warming themselves. We see water vapor in the atmosphere increasing. As the atmosphere warms, it holds more moisture and so on. So this is all consistent with a collective increase in energy within the Earth system that isn't reliant on any single observation. But when we start with the hypothesis that the Earth is warming, there are lots and lots of measurements that are consistent with that conclusion. So again, coming back to the IPCC, so you don't have to just trust me, warming of the climate system is unequivocal. And since the 1950s, many of the observed changes are unprecedented over decades to millennia. Okay, so what about the causal question? I hope I convinced you that CO2 is increasing and the temperature is increasing. But the other fact is that CO2 is the cause of the warming. Well, first of all, I would say that we have several hundred years worth of physics and chemistry that have studied this question. And this isn't something that was just invented over the last several decades, but scientists have understood the role of CO2 and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere for well over a century. The basic greenhouse effect on the planet makes Earth 33 degrees Celsius warmer than it would be without an atmosphere. And the point here is that there's a lot of science that goes back well over a century that builds on this idea that CO2 is an important greenhouse gas and it contributes to establishing the temperature on our planet. And from that theory and history alone, we would expect that as we increase CO2 within the Earth's atmosphere, that the temperature should correspondingly change. We also have records. I've already shown you this ice core record that goes back now 800,000 years. And now there's two curves on this plot. There is a CO2 estimate, which I've already shown you. And then in light blue, you can see temperature on this plot as well. And I think the take-home message here is that temperature and CO2 have marched in lockstep over this time period. And so we have a lot of Earth history that we can estimate through various records going back very far in time that tell us that CO2 and temperature are strongly linked. So there's this kind of evidence that also gives a strong support for the idea that CO2 and temperature are connected. And finally, I would say that we have climate models, which are our way of running control experiments to estimate causal effects. And so what I'm going to do in this video is I'm showing you in black right now the observed temperature record. And what's going to sweep over here successively is climate model estimates in counterfactual worlds where only, oh, let me get it started, I think. Oh, not that, that. All right, so the counterfactual worlds in which only natural first things cause the planetary change. So this is for orbital changes, Earth's representation or orientation relative to the sun. The next thing is solar variability. And what you should be noting here with these natural causes is they can trace reasonably well the early part of the record, but none of them are picking up that significant warming in the latter part of the record. So that was volcanoes. Here they are, these natural causes all collectively. You can see the estimate from the climate models about what our global temperature change would have been if only those things were influencing the climate. Now we're looking at some of the human-caused changes. So these are land use changes, ozone changes, which have caused slight increases in temperature. Aerosol changes through industrial activities have actually cooled the planet slightly. And here are the greenhouse gas changes over that period. And what it's going to show now is the collective estimate of those human-caused changes and how well it matches the observed record. So there are each of those simulations and how they match the observations. And now, in fact, the truth is that all of these things have caused temperature changes over the last roughly 150 years. And here are all the factors influencing it. But what you should take away from these collective animations is that while lots of things cause climate to change, from the climate model's perspective, the clear causal connection between the increasing temperatures and what's changing on our planet is the increases in greenhouse gases. And that is demonstrated causally very effectively through these experiments. Whoop. So that brings us back to my initial statement, which is the Earth is warming and we are causing it. And once again, the IPCC statement representing the vast consensus across the community, most of the observed increases in global average temperatures since the mid-20th century is very likely due, and in IPCC language, very likely is 95% likelihood, very likely due to the observed increase in anthropogenic greenhouse gas concentrations. So a point I want to make at this point is that what a lot of this is telling us is that the impacts of climate change are here. So when we look around the world and we look at the increases in extreme events, droughts, forest fires, the strength of hurricanes, flooding, et cetera, Over the last several decades, as scientists, we've been able to attribute more and more of that activity to man-made climate change, to human causes that are increasing both the likelihood of these events occurring and making the events occur with higher severities. So it's not to say that a given event might not have happened without climate change, but what we're finding in many cases is that climate change made the occurrence of those events more likely, and in many cases made the impacts more severe. So with that as what we've observed and kind of where we're at, an obvious question is, what does the future hold? And we can turn to climate models for that, but predicting the future, or projecting the future as we usually say, is fraught with uncertainty. And a lot of those uncertainties aren't necessarily due with the science, but actually are attributable to the socioeconomic decisions we make go into the future. So there's lots of questions around how we will generate energy in the future, how we will use that energy, how countries will continue to modernize and develop, how many of us there will be in the future. All of these questions are outstanding and represent difficult things to pin down into the future. And so what we do in terms of projecting possible pathways into the future is make climate scenarios where this is the observed record that I've already shown you. And then this fan of different climate model simulations represents different possible scenarios into the future. This lower blue line represents what we call an aggressive mitigation scenario, where we actively work to reduce emissions over the next several decades. Whoop, sorry. And this red line represents the business as usual scenario, sort of what happens if we continue on the current path that we find ourselves. And there's a couple interesting things within this figure. So first of all, the overall projected temperature increase are between about 0.3 degrees C, this lower aggressive mitigation scenario, to almost 5 degrees Celsius change if we follow the business as usual path. But another important thing to notice is these light shading regions around each of these darker lines represent the scientific uncertainty. Those are the results that we get for lots of different climate models, and that's the kind of scientific uncertainty based on state-of-the-art climate models that we have. By far, the much larger uncertainty is the full expanse of this fan, which represents decision uncertainty. Essentially, that's dependent on what we do going into the future. So depending on how you look at it, it's either good news because our fate is in our own hands. The bad news is that in many ways, we're following this business as usual pathway. A couple points to make on this, just in terms of what a 4 to 5 degrees Celsius change looks like. This is the skyline of Manhattan. The Freedom Tower is about 550 meters high. During the last ice age, the last glacial maximum, ice was terminating here on Manhattan Island. It probably wasn't quite as high as the Freedom Tower, but likely followed essentially the skyline of the other buildings that you see in Manhattan. And that was for a change of 4 to 5 degrees in the opposite direction. So an ice age of change in the opposite direction. This 4 to 5 degrees increase of warming, you can think of as an ice age of change of warming in the opposite direction. So the difference between 4 and 5 degrees cooling was ice several tens to hundreds of meter high here in Manhattan. And when we think about impacts in the opposite direction, that's the kind of scale that you should have in your mind. And secondly, when I show you these projections, 2100 might feel like a long ways off, but in fact, many children being born today will live to 2100. Given current life expectancies, it's not unlikely that, for instance, my kids who were born over the last couple of years or kids being born today will actually live to 2100. So this is now at a point where those projections are within a human lifetime. Okay, so the last thing that I want to do is talk more regionally about some of the risks faced with the projected warming into the future. And you know, one of the most important things about risk is just simply that the more that the global mean temperature increases, the increase in the number of risks. So the likelihood of various things happening increases and the severity of those things increase. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. What I'm going to do with regional impacts is just focus on a couple very specific things. This is the projected temperature changes in the United States under two different scenarios. So this is mid-20th century and late 20th century. And then each of the columns here represents sort of moderate mitigation scenario and that business as usual scenario. And the colors on here represent changes in temperature between, let's say in the moderate scenario, around 2 to 3 degrees, and then in the business as usual between 7 and 8 degrees. And these are in Fahrenheit. You can see the Northwest, or the Northeast, sorry, is one of the regions that will warm the most. In fact, it's projected in the near term by 2035 to warm under the business as usual scenario by as much as 3.6 degrees above the pre-industrial period. And actually regionally, that's one of the largest increases for the United States. So we just focus on temperature, and temperature is an easy impact to think about with regard to the impacts that we might consider. But I just want to give a couple very quick examples. One is here in the sort of tri-state area. I want you to focus on the right here, which is kind of an interesting figure, showing how the tri-state area under these different scenarios, the red is the higher emission scenario, that business as usual, sort of where we will be by the end of this century in terms of our average climate. And if we follow this business as usual scenario, we are expecting a climate more similar to South Carolina and Georgia. And as things get more hot and more humid, one of the things that will certainly be true over the summer is danger of heat exposure, which will mean many more emergency visits as well as temperature-related deaths. So this is actually the projected number of deaths. This is for the 1980s. And for those two different scenarios, and you can see how risk increases for the business as usual scenario versus a more aggressive mitigation scenario, where out at the end of this century, the increase in projected deaths due to heat extremes will increase by either roughly 200 people or by about 100. And this is specifically for Manhattan. So lots more heat exposure with a lot of public health implications as a result. But in addition to the air temperatures, there will also be a lot of things that change in temperature as well. And it's also true that the sea surface temperatures and the ocean temperatures will change. We've already seen a significant amount of warming. These are sea surface temperatures off of the Northeast coast. And those temperatures have been increasing just like the air temperatures. They've been increasing actually faster than the global rate of sea surface temperature changes. If we project that out into the future, if we follow the aggressive mitigation scenario, we expect around a degree and a half of change versus over 2 to 3 degrees of change into the future. Who cares about those things? Well, we care about it in part because there are lots of things that live in the oceans, and we've already been seeing over the last several decades populations of lobster moving in or out of the area are increasing in biomass because they like it warmer. Some species like Maine cod going down in biomass because of the elevated temperatures. Black sea bass have been migrating into the area off the Northeast continental shelf. These southern lobsters have been moving out or actually dying as a consequence of some of the warming. So it's just an example to think about the kind of marine environment that all of us depend on in so many ways, economically and in other fashions, that will also be changing. It's not just the air temperatures that we can expect to experience. Just some ballpark figures to think about different industries. The outdoor recreation industry in the Northeast accounts for over 150 billion in consumer spending and over 1 million jobs. Agriculture, fishing, forestry, and relating industries, 100 billion to 500,000 jobs. Northeast wind and recreation, again, almost 3 billion and over 44,000 jobs. All of these industries and many more will be impacted by the changing nature of our climate as species migrate out, migrate in, as various forests and ecosystems struggle to adjust to the changes. Think about, for instance, skiing in the Northeast. In many cases, the viability of ski resorts in the Northeast will be significantly impacted as a consequence of reduced snow cover over the winter season. So all of these things will be affected by the climatic impacts that we expect into the future. And it has real social and economic implications for the Northeast. And finally, I want to say, another important impact of climate change is, of course, sea level rise. We actually have a tide gauge in Battery Park just next to the Coast Guard station down there, if you're familiar with it. We've experienced about 6 inches of sea level rise since mid-century, and the projections over the next 14 years are for about the same amount over that 14-year period. The global sea level rise projections under the business as usual scenario is as much as 1 meter or 3 feet into the future, with huge implications. The reason why we care about sea level rise is for lots of different reasons. Things like king tide flooding. This is an example of that occurring at the high tide that we experience along the Northeast. This is Annapolis, Maryland flooding, not because of any rain events, but just because of high tides. Forest dieback as different wetlands encroach on forest areas. You can see these white cedars that have died along this riverside because of the increasingly high sea level that is encroaching on these areas. Of course, if you lived in New York during Hurricane Sandy, I don't have to remind you of the impact on our infrastructure, particularly the subway system. This is the South Ferry Station. As sea level continues to rise, even if nothing happens to hurricanes as a consequence of climate change, it will be happening on higher and higher sea levels, which will implicate more and more of our infrastructure. In fact, this lower plot shows in progression from purple to red, the increasing areas that will be subject to vulnerability under the 100-year flood stages. So as you get more yellows and reds, you're seeing more areas that will be impacted by those 100-year floods as a consequence of projected sea level rise. And the last point I want to make about all of this is in terms of climate change impacts, one of the things that's also true is that the most vulnerable in our communities will be impacted the most. So this is at a county level in the US. These are the poorest counties, poorest 10% up to the richest counties. And this is the damage relative to each county income. And you can see that for these poorer communities, while this is done at the county level, this is also true for communities, for instance, in places like the 5 boroughs of New York City. The reason for this, of course, is that a lot of these marginalized communities have the fewest resources, have infrastructure that's ailing in so many different ways. And so as these impacts are felt, these communities are at least able to adapt to these changes and to respond to the emergencies when they occur. And it's an important environmental justice issue to keep in mind as we think about the impacts of climate change and who among us will be impacted. And this actually scopes out. It happens, it's true, of course, with local communities, it's true at the national level, and it's true internationally as well. Okay, so I realize that a lot of that may have been depressing, but I want to make a couple final points, and it's going to date me with my cultural touchdowns here, but this may be depressing to hear, but I'm reminded of a cartoon I used to watch when I was young, G.I. Joe, maybe you remember it, but at the end of each episode, they would always say that knowing is half the battle. It is important to educate ourselves about these challenges, and it may be depressing to hear about them, but it's also empowering and calls us to action and represents the serious concerns that all of these impacts mean for us and what needs to be done. So it's not intended to cause inaction, but actually motivate action. And the first thing that we all need to do before we take action is to educate ourselves. The other cultural touchstone is this scene from Austin Powers. You may remember this scene where the security guard on the left is yelling and screaming as this steamroller approaches. Turns out that the steamroller is creeping along. I think of it as the chronic impacts of climate change. 2100 still feels like it's far away. We do have time to respond to these things. And the last thing that we want to be is a screaming security guard that does nothing. I would encourage us all to step out of the way in this scenario, just like I would encourage all of you listening to think about how we can take the challenge that's represented by climate change to actually step up, make a difference, and address this incredibly urgent challenge for us currently, because it's affecting us currently, as well as for those people that we're leaving behind. And I think my time is up, but the last thing that I want to say is that all of my slides have sourcing information, but this slide also contains some of the primary data that I showed you and some useful websites that may be of interest to you. I want to call out specifically the 4th U.S. National Climate Assessment that has lots of information on how climate change will impact each region across the United States. And I think it would be useful for any of you to look at as something you might want to incorporate in your classrooms. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason, for this wonderful presentation. We'll leave the resources on for just a second as Sarah gets ready. Sarah Pigeon will join us remotely. She is working for SolarOne, and she joined SolarOne in 2009 and saw the growth of Green Design Lab from a small-scale pilot to its current reach of over 800 schools. So Sarah is passionate about inspiring New York City students to bring sustainability in their schools and communities. And prior to joining SolarOne, she worked as an educator at the Center for the Urban Environment in Brooklyn, where she taught classes in urban design and ecology. However, her real passion for environmental education began during her childhood, spent as a camper and staff member at Frost Valley YMCA in the Catskill Mountains, where she was first exposed to sustainable practices like composting food waste. Sarah holds an MBA in Management for Mission-Driven Organizations from Marlborough College in Vermont. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much. I might go a few minutes over because we're a little behind, but I'll keep it pretty quick. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about some of SolarOne's programs and also a little bit about the need for a focus on providing professional development training for K through 12 teachers as a key lever for systems change when we are talking about climate change. So SolarOne is a nonprofit organization founded in 2004. We have 3 major programs, and I'm going to quickly tell you about the 2 that are not our K through 12 education program. So one of our programs is called Here Comes Solar, and the goal of the Here Comes Solar team is to help increase access to solar energy for underserved communities. So what we do is we partner with environmental justice and social justice organizations, as well as affordable housing providers, to help them navigate the process of getting solar installed. And we also help them get solar at a much lower rate by providing free site assessments and doing collective purchasing with multiple organizations or affordable housing providers. Another big part of our Here Comes Solar program is helping to launch community solar here in New York City. So for any of you who are interested, definitely visit solarone.org and click the Here Comes Solar page. There are ways for any New Yorker who is a Con Edison customer to sign up. This is kind of like signing up for something like Green Mountain Energy, except it's even cooler because it's actually a local solar installation right here in New York City. And we're also working with the city to set up one of the first solar installations for NYCHA buildings as well, where the residents will reap all of the financial benefits of that solar installation. In addition, we have a green workforce training program where we provide hard skills and technical training to underemployed New Yorkers. So typically what we do is partner with existing workforce agencies such as the Fortune Society, St. Nick's Alliance, or Strive International. And we provide the hard skills training focused on providing access to careers in the emerging clean energy economy. So we do green construction, solar installation, green electrical, energy efficiency, building performance, and we also provide the associated industry recognized certifications that helps the folks in New York who need these jobs the most get access to these jobs. Our Green Design Lab program is our K through 12 program, and it's designed to support students and teachers to explore environmental sustainability, specifically with a focus on climate change through the lens of 5 different units, which are energy, air quality, water, food, and materials. However, energy is definitely our most substantial curriculum component. We deliver the program by partnering with schools both in the classroom to provide what we call a classroom residency program, where we come into schools maybe once a week over anywhere from 1 to 10 weeks, and we actually co-teach with teachers, which we also see as a form of professional development training, because it is our hope that teachers, once they see an outside nonprofit educator stepping into the classroom, teaching hands-on activities about climate change and with a focus on solutions to climate change, that then they will feel more comfortable teaching those on their own in the future. We also do quite a bit of professional development training, formal training for classroom teachers here in New York City and actually across New York State. So we feel that preparing teachers to teach about climate change, as I mentioned earlier, is an extremely powerful lever for change as we're facing this climate crisis that Jason so thoroughly explained. Those were great slides, by the way. And it's really important also, in thinking back to the slide talking about how climate change is really going to hit some of our most some communities who really aren't prepared to handle it, and communities who do not have access to the wealth to be able to manage these situations in the future. So it's really important for us to take the lead in that effort. And one way we can do that is by training teachers. There's plenty of research available to demonstrate the need for additional training resources. And we want to take that a step further and not only provide training on climate change, why it's happening, what it is, and encouraging students to look at that data and understand the issues, but we also want to prepare our most underserved communities to have access to the emerging careers that are going to be the solutions to climate change. We feel that one of the best ways we can not only address climate change, but ensure that we're preparing all New Yorkers for it, is to make sure that the next generation are leading the effort to expand all of these industries that will provide high-paying jobs and will also help us solve these problems. So one thing that we do also is that we do have a big focus on career and technical education and on providing programming for multilingual learners. Another big key that I believe is critical for any successful program to address climate change is that we have to focus on partnerships. No one city agency or teacher or nonprofit organization has the capacity on their own to address this global issue. So the way that we've delivered our programs in the past, and I think what has made our programs successful in reaching hundreds of schools and teachers, is that we believe in partnerships. So some of those different partnerships are our New York City Solar Schools program. So we partner closely with DCAS, which is the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, who pays all of New York's energy bills, and also the New York City Department of Education's Office of Sustainability and STEM office to provide professional development training focused on solar and climate change to support teachers to bring that into their classroom. And one thing we've been able to do as a local organization, which I think other local organizations can learn from as well, is to really focus on aligning your content to state and city standards. So we're working on actually diving even deeper to that specific content alignment this year, looking at next generation science standards, which includes an explicit mention of the need to address climate change in both middle and high school science, which is very exciting. And also looking at how do we fit climate change into these existing classes that students are already taking in New York. So if a high school student has to prepare for the Earth Science Regents exam, and it's a very specific test to prep for, one thing we can do is make sure our activities actually complement that exam and tie into it. So if we're talking about how the sun hits the Earth, we can talk about that through the lens of solar as one way we can draw those connections, and instead of creating something that a teacher needs to add on, we can provide lessons and curriculum that teachers can fit in. We also partner really closely with lots of local environmental justice organizations, and in the state we work quite a bit with the New York Power Authority and their environmental justice program. Again, it's really critical to us that we are making sure that we do the work to not just partner with schools who reach out to us, but that we take that extra step to reach out to schools who might be in need of these programs. Throughout our solar program, we also, like I said, we focus a lot on skills for these future green careers. And one other way that we do that is through hard skills. So we have brought some components of our adult workforce training program into our high school level programs. And one of the workshops we do is actually with students in New York City's career and technical education programs, and we do a mock solar installation in the classroom with electrical students to prepare them for careers in the solar industry. So just some key learnings and takeaways. We really believe that professional development training and curriculum resources focused on climate change are a key lever for change. And one way to do that effectively is to focus on solutions and solutions through the green job economy. We believe that partnerships are key, and educational networks can connect an entire industry and really support this growth in a way that is equitable for all. And finally, workforce development starts in middle and high school. So I'd love to chat more, but I think we're getting close to time. So I just want to say thanks. And if anyone has any questions about the Green Design Lab, check out thegreendesignlab.org or visit Solar One, the organization's website, solarone.org. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for this wonderful explanation of what you do and how you work with different schools and develop teachers to bring this into the classroom. So our next speaker, and don't forget to all the participants, don't forget to send us some questions that we can answer later. So last but not least, Mark Rolla is joining us. And he will explain a little bit more about the challenges of really bringing this into one school and expanding it so it's accessible for all students. Mark is a sustainability coordinator and science teacher for the New York City Department of Education. He works at the elementary public school called PS 90, the Magnet School for Environmental Studies and Community Wellness, located in the neighborhood of Coney Island in Brooklyn. He's driven by his deep sense of responsibility towards environmental sustainability and conservation. Mark provides numerous avenues of practicing sustainability measures which aid in decreasing his community's carbon footprint. Combating climate change is multifaceted, and Mark creatively finds ways to incorporate climate education in all of his projects. For example, Mark has spearheaded a 10-stream recycling system, composting projects, gardening with an emphasis on endemic species, energy conservation, Billion Oyster Project, promotion of nutritious plant-based meals, campus beautification, and promoting of an overall sense of well-being in our environment. Mark also tirelessly educates his classrooms on the importance of lowering our carbon emissions as a way to exhibit the community's dedication towards fighting climate change. So welcome, Mark.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again, Jason and Sarah. So yes, I am the sustainability coordinator at PS 90, the Magnet School for Environmental Studies and Community Wellness. So a little backstory on us. So basically, three years ago, we became a magnet school, and our amazing principal, Greta Hawkins, came to me and told me, Mr. Rolla, I want you to start a program, a free program, a recycling program, something that we can kind of all get behind. So within 3 months, we basically started an amazing recycling program, and we were recognized by Grow NYC DSNY as a super recycler for 2017. That's kind of the seed of how our school kind of came to be into basically our 5 themes that we focus on today of sustainability, environmental studies, wellness, social emotional learning, and technology. So with that is kind of everything we do. Everything we do is embedded within these 5 themes. And again, all started when we, first became a magnet school and we started to recycle and, bring everything kind of together for full circle. So,
We lost you, Mark.
am I here? Can you hear me?
Okay, you're back. Thank you. Yes.
So this is actually, we have a school-wide climate change curriculum that was developed by our curriculum specialist. Every grade participates, and this is actually one of the projects one of our students created, and actually fits exactly into what we're talking about, that climate change affects everyone, but not equally. And that's the problem. This is an amazing person, Elizabeth Jean-Pierre, who works as executive director of Uprose. And I got to meet her last year, and a light bulb went off in my head when she told us that, 21st century is when it comes to climate change is the civil rights movement of today. So climate change affects people that are disproportionately burdened by pollution, poverty, systematic violence associated with multinational corporations driving these ecological crises, as she says. So it's really important that we get behind these issues, because our most vulnerable are the ones that are truly affected by climate change and environmental justice issues. So on the local level, obviously we know that cities, we live in New York City, we produce a lot of waste and a lot of pollution, and that obviously ties into environmental studies and obviously climate change. And some of the kind of the local issues that, you know, teachers and educators can get behind when we focus on air quality. We know that the city recently estimated that up to 3,000 people, close to 3,000 people each year die due to quality change, particulates matters in the ozone. So it's important that these are issues that we can all get behind and understand that it affects our lowest of low, and people that are in areas that are most polluted are the ones that we really need to focus on. We talk about our water. Oops, sorry, go back. I skipped water. Can't go that. Our waterways, we know that we have a dual system where our water, our runoff and our sewage water meet, and sometimes when it's a rainy day, that stuff runs right into our local waterways. And that's something us as New Yorkers can identify as an issue that we all need to get behind and understand that it's important that we have clean waterways, and it affects not only our health, but, you know, the health of our planet. And we talk about our land. We have areas in New York that are, you know, considered brownfields, areas that we need that have been left in bad conditions. And unfortunately, we in New York City have over 10,000 properties designated by the city as subjected to major environmental studies and management. So again, these are topics that we can bring to our students, and again, it's local, and it's something that we can, you know, bring to them, and they can understand that these issues in our communities affect environmental studies and climate as a whole. And then last but not least, we talk about food. And I like to talk about the 3 Ps of processed, packaged, and poor quality. And how does this all relate to climate change? The more we know where our food comes from, the more we care. The more we care, the more we want to do to, you know, understand that food, what we're eating, has a big role in climate change. When we talk about fossil fuels, natural gases, animal agriculture is right up there with one of the, again, the leading causes of human impact on our climate. So again, as I always selfishly do, is go vegan, a healthy you, and a healthy planet. To, you know, again, to encourage our students and make better choices for themselves and all those around us. So the 2 biggest issues that we face is that we have to care. We know that many of these items, a lot of our trash, a lot of our food comes from far, far away. And the more we know where our food comes from, the more we know where our trash goes, the more care we can put into fixing these problems, and to realize that, yes, 2100 is far away, but a lot of these issues are slowly creeping closer to us. So it's important that, you know, it's just because it's out of sight, it shouldn't be out of mind, and that these local issues are important to us and our community. And last but not least, also just social norming, community norming, making sure that, you know, everywhere we go, all the standards of, you know, common practices of even just waste management, as I say, are important, because these things matter. When we know that we only recycle 10% of our plastic, and that all the plastic ever created on Earth is still on the Earth. These things matter, that we have social and community norms, and we generalize that information for all, and so that we know that, these things matter to us and our community, and that this also affects our planet. So what are we doing to educate the future here at PS90? So again, tackling all these issues, particularly air quality. So our school, we really emphasize our school garden. We have a ever expanding school garden that even today we were working with our students is really great. Trees and plants, having plants in your classrooms and having plants and trees outside of your school are a great way to mitigate and control, our pollution and the issues that we face due to poor quality air, especially in our low-income areas. Having proper signage, we've really focused on having signs outside, no idling, and again, educating the community on the importance of turning off your car when dropping off your student. These are really important topics and areas that we as educators can help with our communities. When it comes to water, one of the biggest programs that we've been working on is the Billion Oyster Project, which is a really great organization who focuses on obviously restoring habitats to local waterways, and also restoring an oyster population that helps to filter all of our New York City water. So it's a really amazing organization that we'll take part of, and I hope more schools can join the goal to get obviously 1 billion oysters back into our water, and obviously clean up our water that is affected by our sewer system. On health and wellness, and as I talked about, again, one of the leading causes of climate change and climate and environmental justice is what we eat. And we are one of only 4 New York City schools that are a vegetarian school. And we pride ourselves on giving kids healthy food. And we understand that healthy food is not only healthy for our children, but it's also healthy for the planet. So that's kind of one of our pride and joys. We have a lot of other great programs we have at PS90, but that's kind of our main focus is on giving kids the healthiest meals they can get in New York City. When it comes to waste, again, as mentioned, we have a 10-stream recycling system. It's important that, the items we throw away, there is no way, as they say. So it's important to teach and educate our students on the importance of caring about what they create, the consumerism that exists in our society. And so we have an amazing 10-stream recycling system. And we just introduced a share table. At lunch, there's a lot of waste in New York City schools. 50% of our food is thrown away in our schools, and actually in many other areas. We're talking about supermarkets and such. So teaching kids that, we don't need to throw it away, that we can share it and other kids will eat it. So again, we have a lot of really amazing programs at our school that focus on environmental justice and climate change as well. And then last but not least is kind of where this all ties into, and I know Sarah was talking about, is kind of getting behind a curriculum and having our students being a part of an everyday climate action academy. We actually have a curriculum that we started in January that goes all the way through June, that every day the students are learning about climate change through math, ELA, science, and social studies. So it's embedded into the curriculum. And so we are obviously evolving and improving our Climate Action Academy programming. So we're really excited about it, and we hope to roll it out in September of next year. So again, getting behind a year-long curriculum for all schools with an emphasis on climate action and climate change. These are some of our partners for those sustainability coordinators out there or teachers out there. These are all the amazing companies that have helped us along the way and have donated their time, their resources in getting our school off the ground. It takes a village. to raise a environmental and sustainable school. So we thank all of these partners here. And again, they've done valuable work in our school, and we appreciate all they have done. And last but not least, just my advice for future or current sustainability coordinators. This is my simple formula for success. You need administrative support. You need to have passion, students, and that's where you become successful. If you have the administrator behind you, if you're passionate about sustainability or environmental justice or any climate change, and you have students, the students are always willing to get behind what you're passionate about, you will be successful. It's a really simple formula. And my advice number 2, stay focused on one thing that you can be successful at or that you're passionate about. So I say, stay in your lane. It's really easy for you to get overwhelmed because there's so many topics out there that you would like to get behind. But again, focusing on one that you can be super successful in is really important. And once you've grown that, then you can maybe branch out and do other things. As we've done in our school, we focus on our waste management. That was our bread and butter. And now we are branching out into gardening and hydroponics and all other areas of sustainability. And that's just a little picture of my daughter, who's, the future generation, making sure those food scraps are properly stowed away. So again, it's my passion. I love waste management. And again, getting behind something that you're passionate about is the best way to be successful in whatever sustainability practice you have. And last but not least, if you want to contact me for any reason, I am more than happy to help any educators, get in touch with resources. So here is my contact information. I, again, would love to help you start or continue your sustainability efforts at your school. So thank you very much, and that is all.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you, Sarah and Jason, for your wonderful presentation. We have about 5 minutes left for Q&A. We have a few questions that you have sent us. There we go. So we'll address them now. So first, a comment of one of you, Jason, can't thank you enough for turning information into a call to action. This doesn't happen often enough, so thank you, Jason. Question for Mark. Historically, animals have existed in herds and they have not created the problems we are facing. Animals can be managed sustainably so they continue to interact with the land, air, and water in a positive manner. What we should be focused on is the beginning of everything, and that's the soil. Herbal soils are nurtured. I was wondering if your composting endeavor, if you're teaching students how to rebuild soil, the interactions between soil and tree root systems.
Oh, yes. So to answer that question, again, we know that, again, because I'm a master composter through the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens. So we obviously know that compost mitigates the soil and helps bring nutrients back into our very depleted soil. But again, yeah, that is actually one of the biggest issues that we don't talk about, is how depleted all of our soil is throughout the world from all the chemicals and other issues that we've created. So yes, that's definitely a big part of my education of the students when we talk about composting and vermicomposting, the importance of mending our soil and bringing back the nutrients that are not there anymore. So yes, so that was a great question. Thank you for that.
Then we have one more question. How can we encourage a positive and effective behavioral shift? There are so many ways we can reduce our impact, but it can be hard to convince others to make changes to their everyday lives. For example, reduce single-use plastics, adopt a vegan diet, etc. Mark, would you like to take that as well?
Yeah, I think we could all kind of touch on that one. Again, as I say that, I think it's important for us to focus on what is the most important to you at that particular time. So again, focusing on what you're most passionate about or what you're most bothered by. But again, there are so many issues, and again, it can be really overwhelming when you think about, the statistic, they say that in 12 years, we can't turn back the hands of time. So again, focusing on what you think you can do in this moment right now. But again, yes, changing your diet, to me personally, is the most important and quickest and easiest thing we can do. I know it could be harder for others, but for me, it was the easiest decision to make. But for others, I understand it may not be. But focus on one thing that you can do tomorrow to make a great impact, whether it's using a reusable bottle, making sure you're, turn your water off when you brush your teeth. But again, making bigger changes is so much more impactful.
Thank you, Mark. Sarah and Jason, would you like to weigh in on this, on how to encourage a positive and effective behavioral shift?
Sarah?
Yeah. I would say definitely just focus on, one thing at a time and connecting with folks on something that, resonates with them personally. And I think when people feel some sort of connection with something, whether it's that air quality is something that'll be really meaningful for them and they'll stop idling, or diet change for animals, I think having that personal connection is helpful. And I also think it's important that we as individuals don't take on the ownership of climate change ourselves, and that we also focus on continuing to, work on civic engagement in schools with students and with ourselves, pushing for better regulations, and really remembering that these big companies and that there are powers that be that are really, it is them changing that is so critical for us to fight climate change. So it's important to do that stuff to work on our personal behaviors and encouraging others, but it's also important that we focus on the large scale levers for change always.
Thank you, Sarah.
I think we're wrapping up, but I just want to echo what Sarah and Mark said and say that I see this as the tension between individual and collective action. I think in terms of motivating individual action, the power example is essential. And we've seen, I think from Mark and Sarah, great examples of how to provide examples within our communities of ways that you can engage and connect with these issues on a personal level. Sarah said this already, but making these issues personal and talking to people about how this affects each and every one of us and the specific ways that it does is an important way of individually motivating people. But I also don't think that we can lose track of the collective action. If I want to get rid of my car and ride a bike all the time, that's great. But if there isn't an infrastructure for riding my bike, it's going to be very difficult. And so there's always, I think, a tension between what we can do individually, but also how we have to get involved in collective action to really motivate change that will impact everyone, but doesn't necessarily require that everyone get behind it initially. It's providing choices and changes through other levers than just the individual actions that we can take.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for this call for collective action, and big thank you to all the participants. Thank you to the panelists for being here today. Upon leaving the webinar, you will be asked to, you will receive a link to a very short survey, and please give us feedback so that we can improve these webinars. And we also hope to see you at our next ones. I'm trying to move forward here. Oops. Visit our website, tccolumbia.edu sustainability, to find out more information about our upcoming webinars. We are having one in May and one in June. And we will also post the slides of this presentation and the video so you can share this as a resource with other educators, teachers that you may have. So thank you, everyone.